Hey Jordan, hi Eric. Before I get started with what this video is about, I want to show you a picture. Check this guy out. He literally changed his name to Fire Penguin Disco Panda. And look at how happy he looks. Okay, I'm sorry, I just thought that was awesome. Anyway, I watched your videos. Eric, yours was really interesting. I've never thought too much about remixing, which is kind of weird given that I'm a musician and all. And Jordan, your points about God and the whole philosophy thing about how God could exist while we still have all these terrible things in our world was really, really interesting. Today my topic is kind of similar to yours, Jordan, in it's sort of a philosophical sort of standpoint. It's the idea that everything that can be is. Actually, Jordan, a couple months ago you and I talked about this. I don't know if you remember because it was really late at night and we were waiting for you to get off work, and after you got off work, you and me talked about the idea of a multiverse. That's what I'm talking about today, the multiverse theory. First, you should watch this video by the Brothers Wynn on their channel, What You Want to Know. They'll also lead you to this other video by Rob Bryant called Imagining the 10th Dimension. These people can probably explain it way more eloquently than I can, but it's an interesting theory and I like to talk a bit about it. I'm going to start it in a very similar way to the What You Want to Know video. They start out by talking about linear time. Basically, this is the idea that time runs in a line. Events happen along it and they cannot be changed. However, let's say that you want to invent a time machine to go back in time and stop something from happening. Say, stop JFK from getting assassinated, or stop yourself from asking out that girl and getting so embarrassed by it. The problem with making this time machine is that if you go back in time to change the event you want to change, you won't actually have done it. Let me explain. Let's use the example of you going back in time to try and save JFK from being assassinated. Say that you somehow detain him and stop him from going in that parade that fateful November day. The problem with this is that you could never have done this. Why? Because if you go back in time to save JFK from being assassinated, in the future when you originally decided that you wanted to go back in time to save JFK, he didn't need to be saved because he had never been killed. This is known as the time paradox. One of the most famous ones that you may have heard of already is called the grandfather paradox. It was first described by French author René Barjavel. Forgive me, I don't actually know how to speak French. In the book, the main character goes back in time and accidentally kills his grandfather, thus negating his own existence. Think about it. The grandfather was killed before he had the opportunity to marry. Because of this, he didn't have kids. Because he didn't have kids, these kids couldn't have kids. So the main character could never go back in time to kill his grandfather in the first place. However, there is one way to make time travel fun again. It's the idea of the multiverse. What that means is there's multiple timelines branching off of one another. You just have to find the right way to get to them. Let's go back to our JFK example. Let's say you do go back in time and save JFK from being assassinated. Now you've just entered into a new timeline, a timeline where JFK was never killed. This could change the entire course of human events. Who's to say what would happen because of this change? Maybe JFK would eliminate our debt and make sure that we never have a deficit in American history again. Or maybe JFK somehow turns evil and takes over the world. Or maybe he just gets assassinated at a different time. The point is that you've just left the old timeline behind. You've left your entire world behind for a brand new one. So that's kind of the basic idea of the multiverse. There's just tons of timelines branching off of each other. Rob Bryant explains it in his video, saying that there are an infinite number of timelines branching off of each other. In his video, Bryant talks about 10 dimensions, the first dimension being a dot. And it's interesting because the 10th dimension is also a dot, because it is every timeline and every possibility everywhere. Essentially, it's the idea that there's an infinite number of timelines and an infinite number of possibilities. So what exactly does this mean? Well, it essentially means that everything that can be is. There's an infinite number of possibilities and an infinite number of timelines and an infinite number of universes, but in a lot of ways that's got to mean that a lot of the universes are very similar with like one or two minute details changed. For example, there's a timeline in some universe somewhere where everything is exactly the same. I'm the same, you're the same, Jordan's the same, Eric's the same. The only difference is that this show has been created, except instead of Eric being a part of it, Fire Penguin Disco Panda is the third person. Given his name, I think he'd be a really interesting host. Maybe we should talk to him about joining us. Anyway, no matter how you slice it, the multiverse theory is really crazy. There's an infinite number of possibilities. What does that mean? Can we access them? Can we trade places with somebody? Like, can I trade places with a version of me that's the president of the universe? This idea is kind of crazy, and it also means that we may have to rewrite the current laws of physics. In fact, I've talked to a couple of scientists who have actually said that there's some research that proves the idea of a multiverse. I recently talked to a military scientist who said that some of their telecommunications were using the multiverse theory. They would send signals to a particle in some distant universe. They don't even think it's in our own universe. And then it would get sent back to wherever it needed to go. These messages are pretty impossible to crack for one simple reason. As soon as the particle is used, we don't know where it goes. This also kind of brings a scary side to the multiverse theory. We don't completely understand it. We can use it, but we're not quite sure what we're doing with it. And more than that, what if we accidentally jump into another timeline where it's completely different from our own? Would we survive? Like I said, if I traded places with a version of me that was the president of the universe, would I be able to handle that responsibility? I don't know. If nothing else, it's something very interesting to think about. I'd like to hear both of your takes on it, and I'm very excited to see what videos you guys have for me. Eric, I'll see you on Friday. Jordan, I'm excited to see what you have on Monday.